Look at a standard Hollywood depiction of the Middle Ages. You see peasants covered from head to toe in thick layers of grime, aristocrats who treat bathing like a lethal form of torture, and entire towns wading through knee-deep sewage. At first, this looks like an accurate picture of our ancestors, a period of dark, unwashed brutality before modern plumbing saved humanity. But that filthy picture is fundamentally broken. Beneath the cinematic mud lies a surprisingly organized culture of personal etiquette, public bathhouses, and complex engineering. So why do we assume that medieval Europe was a wasteland of total filth? Was it just a lack of running water? Was it religious superstition shunning bodily care? Or are we projecting our own modern standards onto a society that kept clean using a completely different set of rules? Before we ask why medieval people didn't take daily hot showers, we need to ask a stranger question. Why do we assume that cleanliness can only exist through modern pipes? It begins long before the modern era, with a fundamental survival necessity: the need to manage waste and secure fresh water without industrial technology. Towns, castles, and monasteries were built around rivers, springs, and wells specifically to maintain life and health. But that daily struggle for cleanliness had a massive vulnerability. Without modern water pressure, every gallon of water required physical labor to carry, heat, and dispose of. That physical reality created a chain reaction. Long distances, heavy buckets, cold rivers, finite firewood, endless physical labor. And over centuries, modern observers mistook those practical limitations for a total lack of hygiene. Take personal hygiene in a typical medieval household. The vast majority of people did not have water piped directly into their homes, nor did they have the endless fuel required to heat a heavy tub of water every morning. Carrying water from a community well or nearby river was exhausting, back-breaking labor. Full immersion was rare and costly. In most monasteries, monks were granted only a handful of full baths a year. A wealthy noble might travel everywhere with a padded wooden tub instead, guaranteeing comfort on the road. But here is the central mechanism that breaks the modern myth of the filthy peasant. Medieval hygiene wasn't about soaking in a full tub. It was framed as a targeted, daily ritual of functional cleanliness. Think of medieval hygiene like a well-managed, early off-grid camp. Imagine waking up at dawn in a drafty home where every gallon of hot water costs an hour of chopping wood. When resources are limited, you don't waste hours of physical labor and precious firewood filling an entire bathtub just to get clean. Instead, you rely on high-efficiency routines: one wash basin, one linen cloth, and a jug of warm water. Quick, targeted, functional. But daily cleanliness went far beyond the basin. We modern observers confuse the absence of a showerhead with the absence of cleanliness. Because 80% of the medieval population performed heavy physical labor in the fields, daily washing was a practical necessity. Everyone, from field hands to kings, began the morning by washing their hands and face in a basin of cold water. Soap was produced locally and used regularly. It was typically crafted by boiling rendered animal fats, like tallow or lard, together with an alkaline lye solution made from wood ashes, sometimes scented with dried herbs or flowers. For hair care, people relied on a stronger alkaline mixture made from lime and salt to strip away excess oils. Even dental hygiene wasn't ignored. Teeth were routinely scrubbed clean using frayed hazel twigs and pieces of wool cloth to keep plaque at bay. This is the part most people get wrong. People assume medieval society was too primitive to care about bodily cleanliness or social presentation. But medieval culture was deeply obsessed with personal hygiene, especially at the dining table. Because cutlery was a rarity and people ate primarily with their hands, strict social rules governed etiquette. Popular handbooks instructed diners to groom their fingernails, wash their hands before and after meals, wipe their lips before drinking, and refrain from cleaning their teeth with iron knives at the table. Castles, manors, and monasteries featured large communal basins called lavabos outside dining halls, so visitors could wash their hands before touching food. Cleanliness wasn't just about comfort, it was a visible marker of social respect and moral standing. And the search for cleanliness wasn't restricted to private basins. Consider the infrastructure of medieval towns and castles. When towns began to expand rapidly from the 11th century onward, maintaining sanitation became a major public challenge. Local councils maintained public wells, fountains, and canals to supply water. Towns like Nuremberg operated as many as 14 public bathhouses for their citizens. Castles engineered complex systems where rainwater was drained from roofs into lead or ceramic pipes, feeding cisterns and settling tanks that allowed sediment to drop out before the water was drawn for cooking or washing. Some keeps, like Rochester Castle, engineered rope and bucket channels directly into the interior walls to lift well water to every floor. Toilets, often referred to as privies, latrines, or garderobes, were built into castle walls and townhomes with dedicated drainage chutes that funneled waste downward into stone-lined cesspits or directly into surrounding moats. In castles, these chutes were strategically placed over moats, turning a water defense feature into an added layer of sanitation. In growing urban centers, households often shared communal toilets positioned over deep cesspits that collected both human waste and general household rubbish. Because overflowing waste posed a massive contamination risk to nearby wells, local governments enacted strict municipal regulations. Professional night soil laborers, known in various regions as gongfermors or nightmen, were hired specifically for the arduous, unenviable task of shoveling out these stone-lined cesspits under the cover of darkness, removing the waste so it could be transported out of the city or repurposed as agricultural fertilizer. So, if medieval people washed daily, used soap, and built complex plumbing systems, why does the myth of the filthy Middle Ages persist? Because their system had a massive, fatal vulnerability. It could not scale against microscopic threats. Imagine living in a world where you keep your face clean and your table manners flawless, but you have no idea that invisible bacteria are multiplying in the well water. The real complication was a complete lack of germ theory. While medieval people kept their bodies visibly presentable, their waste management systems could easily fail during periods of rapid urban growth. Flooded cesspits, contaminated wells, uncollected refuse, roaming livestock, thriving fleas, and unseen bacteria. When the Black Death struck Europe between 1347 and 1352, carrying off up to half the population, no amount of basin washing or hand grooming could stop a flea-borne bacterial pathogen. Similarly, poor food storage led to widespread outbreaks of ergotism, a toxic fungal poisoning from damp rye known as St. Anthony's fire. And it got worse before it got better. Physicians began blaming the bathhouses themselves, convinced that hot water opened the skin's pores and let disease-laden air rush straight in. Bathing didn't increase. It became suspect. Within a generation, the public baths that once defined daily life fell out of fashion, not from ignorance, from science, just the wrong science. Medieval hygiene was effective at removing visible dirt, but it was completely blind to invisible disease. Furthermore, when Europeans encountered Byzantine or Islamic societies during the Crusades, cultures with continuous Roman bathhouse traditions and sophisticated aqueducts, the Western Europeans were noticeably outmatched in bath frequency and water infrastructure. The myth of the unwashed medieval world became far more than a historical error over time. It became a comfortable story for the modern world. We project total filth onto the Middle Ages to make our own era look enlightened, turning a complex historical reality into a simple caricature of muddy peasants and superstitious Dark Ages. But history never set out to match our modern plumbing. It adapted to the tools it had. So why do we assume medieval people lived in total filth? Because we measure their cleanliness by our taps and pipes instead of their basins and etiquette. Because disease swept through their unmapped microscopic world. No running pipes, no hot showers, no germ theory, just targeted routines, strict etiquette, and physical labor. Medieval hygiene wasn't a total absence of cleanliness. It was an off-grid system built on physical labor, daily basin washing, and strict social etiquette. Every stone latrine, every public bathhouse, and every hand-washing basin is proof that human beings have always striven to keep the grime of the world at bay, using whatever tools their era provided.